A retailer's supply chain typically involves dozens of companies, including fabric mills to trucking companies that with time optimizes product flows as demand becomes more predictable. Now, what happened with COVID is that not only did demand suddenly shift and completely shut down in some cases, but the pandemic response shut everything from overseas factories to foreign ports to shipping and domestic distribution centers and fulfillment centers and even stores. Now, on the consumer side, we saw things like stockouts and shipping delays. But to supply chain execs with boots on the ground during the onset of the COVID pandemic, it was like Armageddon. I'm curious, your role as Chief Supply Chain Officer, right?
It's Chief Supply Chain Officer and Merchandising. So I oversee the front end, everything from concept design through merchandising, global sourcing, planning, inbound logistics, all the way to the DC. So I handle all the front end operations.
Perfect. For you, when did COVID hit your radar as something that you needed to pay attention to and think about from a supply chain perspective?
I really started to pay attention in January, and then big concerns going into Chinese New Year and predicting what it was going to be like coming out of Chinese New Year. So our initial reaction to from a supply chain perspective was to get my entire supply chain and product development team, along with our overseas agent, to pivot quickly and back up all of our key programs. That's the very first thing we did. We spared no time sourcing key fabrics and styles to India to minimize disruption. But then when quarantine hit India in April, we had to quickly reverse course and move all production back to India, to China and Vietnam. But our agent, with our director of corporate social responsibility who reside in Hong Kong, worked together to secure production space and ensure, all that, while, ensuring that all of our social compliance requirements were being met, because those are the things that gets very easily overlooked, right? In this, like, when you're just pivoting so fast.
I'm curious from a difficulty perspective and just, what made it possible for you when so many other companies said that was almost virtually impossible?
So I think the size definitely helps. The other piece is that our product offering, like we are fabric first versus style first. We're not a trend, our product offerings are not fashion. So, once you have the fabric approved, which is the longest part of the product's life cycle, right? So, when you have fabric, you can do many things. And I think that allowed us, being approved in all countries that we produce in, helped us really just get back into business.
Right. But I'd like to go back to, January, February, when you were really starting to take note of COVID. Were there any specific things you had to do on the front end as it relates to those vendor relationships in order to be more prepared or to feel that there was less risk associated with your upstream supply chain as COVID started to really take off?
Yeah, so as it relates to vendor relationships, we feel like that this is a time you really have to rely on our vendor community and our agent, who you've trusted over the years. I mean, you have to go to the people that you know, right? And work in a very transparent way. So it just became more critical, more than ever at this moment. But as a company, primary is we're just a very transparent company in general. That's what we hear from everyone. We share our financial details and growth strategies with not only our team, but with our vendor community on a quarterly basis. It's a very open relationship. And instead of diversification, we decided to lean into our existing supply chain and our agents. We found that was much more effective than just think about like, who can do this for me right at this moment. We did not take that approach at all. So instead of the diversification, we, leaned into our supply chain and was able to drive efficiency, faster turn inventory turn, believe it or not. And we exercise small product development by using 3D design. So like we just took advantage of everything that our partners had overseas, since we are not unable to travel.
Nice. Perfect. That's really interesting. You mentioned the 3D design element. I'm wondering, is it possible to elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, sure. So especially when you're doing kids product, and not fashion kids product, you have your blocks, right? Your set blocks. And the 3D design works really interesting when you're developing print, especially like print and patterns, because you can really look at scale of these things in 3D. So in a minute. So without developing a full sample, our design team and our merchandisers can work with our vendors overseas, like real time, just creating print and pattern design, new silhouettes. And if you really wanted to, you can even do a 3D fashion show. There's so many, technologies that's out there that I think that our industry traditionally don't want to, or did not have enough appetite to tap into. Everyone wants to touch and feel, which is still important, very important. Like you saw in our video, we develop product, we have to touch and feel our product for sure. But I do think that you could cut through some of that timeline on the front end by utilizing 3D design.
Well, were there any other things that you picked up as a result of COVID that you think these are things that we can continue to do moving forward that will make us a better company and maybe a better run supply chain?
Well, I think, we certainly learned that we could do a lot of things remotely.
Mm.
Right. And I think that, we're going to continue to work remotely. Definitely the transparency of communication, really staying close to your vendor resources. Right now, the thing that's top of mind for me personally, for the company, is just building these strategic inventory plans, just to really push our product through and increasing our inventory turn. We are finding that in working strategically, you could just do so much more to increase speed.
Of course, we're here today to talk about COVID and how COVID has impacted retail and retail supply chain management in this case. Mm-hmm. And so let's start with kind of the onset of COVID back in, when we first started to see this unfolding. When did you first suspect that what you were seeing on the news regarding COVID was actually a logistics and a retail issue and not just a health issue?
Right. That's a great question. So, when we first started seeing COVID-19 pandemic become a business and supply chain issue versus something that you might see in the news as a global health concern, it actually had teeth that were coming into our domestic landscape. Probably late February, early March is when I would say that things started to kind of get real, both in terms of policy change. So it was around that time, probably the first week in March, Tractor Supply put together a task force, and that task force met 7 days a week for months, and they still meet regularly. And they came up with, in pretty short order, they came up with about 100 different action items and policy changes that were implemented over the subsequent weeks and months. And so that late February, as the news came from Wuhan and it started to come into the United States, into mid-March. By March 15th, Tractor Supply Store Support Center folks were working from home, and we were well into the into the new normal, if you will, just the onset of it. And then obviously the consumer shopping behavior and the record sales as an essential needs-based retailer started to come in the spring as well.
Nice. So let's go back to some of those early, because I definitely want to come back to this consumer component and the needs and how that affected sales. But can you talk through kind of how the pandemic affected demand
Sure.
and customer spending within Tractor Supply?
Yeah, absolutely. Tractor Supply is we're a retailer that supports a lifestyle. So we're a lifestyle brand. We're not a general merchandiser. We're not a big box store. We don't sell everything to everybody. We cater to a niche, and the niche that we cater to, our customers are loyal, and they rely on Tractor Supply to take care of their families, to take care of their animals and their land. And so when something like any major event, whether it's a weather event or an economic event, or in the case of COVID-19, kind of a multitude of things that kind of hit all at once. Our customers are looking for us as an essential retailer to be there for them. And so I'm super proud of Tractor Supply's leadership for ensuring the health and safety of our team members first and foremost, and giving the customers a safe environment to shop in so they can meet those essential everyday needs. We use a term at Tractor Supply called, it's an acronym we call CUE, C-U-E. It stands for consumable, usable, and edible. And this is a high velocity product line for us. So this is everything from forage to feed to small animal pet food. And these are high turns, high velocity items that really flew off the shelves initially in the spring months. A lot of pantry filling is a term that I heard used quite often. And so I would say, just the sheer spike in demand and shopping at Tractor Supply stores had impact across the supply chain, going from the stores back to the distribution centers, and then even going back to the vendors. And as everyone tried to catch up, as you know, in your line of work, we also have to be weary of the bullwhip effect so that we don't overcorrect, right? But I think that the sales, and when I say sales increase, it's in retail, we look at comparable year-over-year sales, and our spring sales were something like 35% comp sales compared to last year. That's just unheard of. I mean, it is. I mean, we've always had pretty positive comp sales, but I mean, when you look at 35% year-over-year, you're talking about a step change in capacity needs. So I would say the in-stock pressure on the upstream supply chain has been huge. We talked about the transportation capacity tightening. Another aspect of the consumer's response to COVID-19, outside of just the sheer demand, has been the way in which they prefer to shop. Some of that brought on by COVID-19 itself, and the nature of contactless commerce, right? So things that Tractor Supply has worked on very hard this year are digital solutions to support that sort of change in consumer preference, if you will.
I'm interested. You talked about some of these customer spending changes, the demand impacts, and you also, of course, made reference to kind of the contactless conversation and just the whole new ways in which customers were shopping. And of course, you made the connection there that had an effect on how you managed your warehousing and distribution center operations and order fulfillment processes. So I'm curious if we might be able to maybe peel back the layers of that conversation a bit. How did some of these changes that we're talking about in the demand space and in the market and from a consumer interface perspective, how did those changes start to cause a subsequent and associated changes in how you guys manage your logistics operations?
For sure. So a lot of what we've had to do to support the rise in demand and the influx in shopping patterns from a capacity standpoint is we've had to really stretch our distribution center network to its brink. We are now 24/7 operations in all of our distribution centers across 6 million square feet. We have increased our distribution center team staff by about a third. So that's like over 1,000 team members have been added this year. We've had to get creative in terms of how we meet demand, right? So a lot of flow path conversations, integrated business planning with our merch planners and our inventory folks, our transportation people, and DC operations have been getting together on a very frequent weekly, sometimes multiple times per week, to find opportunities to speed up the lead time from vendor to the store, so that we can support those customers and keep those in stocks where they need to be. Bypassing DCs is an example of that. Another thing to speed up the pace of operations is we have instituted, where it makes sense, some pack size changes. So what used to be an each pick is now a case pick, and what used to be a case pick is now a pallet pick. So when you ratchet up the unit of measure, you get speed in the DC, and you get response to where the inventory is needed, and that's in the store. So that's kind of like on the raw capacity side of things. On the consumer preference side of things, it's interesting because, Tractor Supply as an organization has implemented things like next day delivery nationwide. We now have the ability, if you place an order on the website and you want the order delivered to your home, we can pull that inventory from the store and we can have it at your house the next day. So that's been a way to differentiate and to compete in the fast response digital market that we're in. Mobile point of sale, being able to ring up a customer without having to go to a cash register, curbside pickup. Customer places an order online. They have a dedicated parking spot when they pull into the store, and their order is brought out to their truck. I mean, that is really kind of on the preference side, on the digital side, that has really been a lot of our focus this year, and I'm super proud of what the stores have done this year. Just in some cases, complete overhauls. A lot of these initiatives were already in the works, but I think the COVID-19 pandemic has expedited some of the execution of this. And we haven't even really talked about direct to consumer yet, but that's kind of what we're seeing on the response to consumer preference.
So let's talk about direct to consumer and the last mile fulfillment conversation. Of course, again, that's been hot and heavy, and we have seen so much action and growth in that space. Of course, we were already having these conversations pre-COVID, as you just suggested, but of course, COVID really was kind of an accelerant. What's happening as it relates to that B2C and direct to consumer space?
Sure. So it's wide open. It's wide open. And what I mean by that is the activity that we see in our DCs and the activity that I'm directly involved with in my role at Tractor. We've been operating not necessarily at peak day levels, but if you look at peak volume, say on a weekly or monthly basis, we've basically been in peak since March, definitely since April. And I'm talking 5 to 6 times the volume that we were fulfilling out of our DCs this time last year. Mm-hmm. The truth is that Tractor Supply's digital commerce platform does heavily index on the buy online, pick up in store side. So about 60 to 70% of our website sales result in a store visit. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the customer has to go into the store. They can have their order brought out to them. But, over 2/3 of our digital commerce is what we call BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store. The remaining website or e-commerce traffic is this direct-to-consumer channel. And so we are heavy LTL, as you might imagine. I mean, you think about what we sell. We've got riding lawnmowers, we've got log splitters, we've got gun safes. All of these things are heavy and bulky, and so we have to rely on our LTL carrier partners. We also have our fair share of small package, very odd-shaped things that have to be packed out a certain way. And so it's really challenged us to be creative on how we minimize bottlenecks within the pick and pack operations in our DCs. And frankly has gotten us much more prepared for our sort of Black Friday, Cyber Monday season than we would have been otherwise. I think it's just because we had to be, right? So I think that's what we're seeing on the direct-to-consumer side.
So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how COVID has affected kind of frontline employees, the operators that are doing all of that essential work, that important work, within your logistics operations and kind of how you all managed and were able to keep things safe in the process of all that operation.
Yeah, amid COVID-19 and kind of what we've seen this year in 2020, safety has been paramount. Our team members can't take care of our customers if we're not taking care of our team members. So you've got to put, the first things first. And, I've been in the field quite a bit this year. We're implementing a warehouse management system upgrade. And so my team and I have been out traveling to the DCs. And it was definitely a very different way of interacting inside the distribution workplace, but carried out with 100% professionalism. Can't say enough great things about our DC leadership. Phenomenal job. And going up to our senior leadership, everyone has just been prepared, professional, poised. There's never been an issue with stocking, hand sanitizer or anything like that. All of our folks that have worked hard to support the team members have done a great job, and that's first and foremost for Tractor Supply.
I want to thank each of you for your time. I recognize that you're busy, and I'm actually quite inspired by this group. I think you represent three major voices I find in the retail space that can really speak to. We were just talking about COVID. You can really speak to kind of how COVID has affected retail, particularly in the area of supply chain management and what we see happening in terms of retailers, and maybe even some discussions about where we're going after all of this. So first of all, just to level set, so we've got Ruth Summers, who is a consultant and works with various retailers, years of experience in sourcing for retail, and so brings that sourcing and consulting expertise. Greg Kaplan, with a 3PL that works with a lot of major retail clients. So working on the operations and the logistics processing for a lot of major retailers. And then Brian Gibson, who is incoming chair of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, professor at Auburn University, but also does the every 2-year study for RELA.
About every 18 months by the time we get it done. It's supposed to be every year.
And so getting the pulse of retail executives and some of the issues that they're facing in managing their supply chains and logistics. Based on your vantage points, when did you see that COVID-19 and the coronavirus conversation was not just a public health issue, but that it was also an issue for retail supply chain? We started to notice that there was more here than a health issue, that this actually had big impacts in terms of retailers and how they were managing their supply chains. Maybe Ruth, I can start with you, maybe from a sourcing perspective on that. I'll go Craig and Brian.
I mean, I would say that the impact, COVID and the pandemic are the great accelerator, both in good and bad ways, right? So things that were in motion, it became even more glaringly important, needed to be, and things that were ready to fall apart, we saw plenty of that as well. So I think from a sourcing and production perspective, not total supply chain, it was the realization that we're all interconnected. It was the realization that, we can't be transactional in our relationships. And I think it's something that's been going on for more than 20 years. It's been easy to put it on the back burner, I think, at times with different brands. And I think that COVID was the great accelerator of, okay, we have to wake up and pay attention. We aren't in transactional relationships. We are responsible for our suppliers to an extent. And I think that that was probably a very positive thing. It's going through a very brutal time right now, but over the long haul, it will be very positive, I think, in how the industry tackles it. I was reading a terrific McKinsey article, and they love reading their stuff, but they highlighted four things: the remapping of the sourcing mix, the forging stronger supplier partnerships, digitizing the value chain, and adapting operating models and mindsets. So this isn't a fabulous article, but it's not new. And we need to plan for shocks like this. Even if it's as simple as saying, you know what, we're going to put a 5-cent sourcing load and we're going to hold a separate account and we're going to invest that money. And when we have these issues, we have something to help the supplier community. So I really think COVID's in it's tough now, but it's going to be a great accelerator for stronger partnerships in the source and production landscape.
Hey, Craig, what are your thoughts as your clients that you've worked with? When did you started to notice that COVID-19 was having a major effect, and maybe some of your experiences during the onset of the pandemic?
So as a third-party logistics provider for us, we were just like everyone else in the world seeing what was happening, but it was really the reaction to our retailers getting shut down in their stores. And then we began immediate conversations, what that means for the distribution centers, what it means for their overseas production, et cetera. So I wish there was some grand view into what we saw, but we really didn't see it until it was happening. And then once it was happening, it was all hands on deck in every aspect of the business to try and figure out how to kind of keep what we've built over the years in play, while at the same time understanding that we're not going to have any work. So I think, and it was interesting, one of the things Ruth said that was great was about, preparing for the future, preparing for a future pandemic. As it relates to our business on the distribution side of things, we were fairly protected because we're so integrated with our customers that we kind of were working together to make sure we were all alive. On the transportation side, as most of you know, the moves are very transactional. You get paid by the mile, by the trip, et cetera. So with no miles and no trips, we had absolutely zero revenue coming in, and it was, extremely difficult. So along the same lines of preparing for it, retailers for many years have spent so much time talking about preparing for the future, just making sure they're looking out at what might happen. And here's something that I think somehow kind of caught us off guard. So it's an excellent point that Ruth makes.
Thank you, Craig. And Brian, what about you? I know you do your study and you engage with retail executives. What's your take on how COVID, essentially emerged, and maybe even taking us a little bit further? What's some of what you're seeing now that we are 7 months in, and maybe some of the data that you've seen in your studies?
So a couple of interesting things, Terry. Number one, I was at the Retail Industry Leaders Association conference in late February. And there was one session about COVID at that conference, and it was very well attended and couldn't get inside the door practically. But people weren't at a panic at that point. Fast forward about 3 weeks, March 12th and 13th, I'm in Chicago for a CSCMP board meeting. And that day we all happened to see through various news outlets this kind of pandemonium at a local Costco, people fighting over toilet paper. And we laughed about it at dinner that night, right? It's like, what is going on? It's not that type of an illness. And next thing you know, by the time we finished our meeting the following day, virtually everyone in that room had been told, come in, get your stuff, go home, you're working remotely. Universities are shutting down. So we went through this very rapid, in about a 3-day period, where once somebody said, we're shutting down, then everybody else. And these were people at the meeting that work for very large companies, as you well know. So it came on us very quickly as opposed to, oh, we're planning for this, we know this is going to happen. Biggest challenge that I saw in having talked to people, post, shock, so to speak, was, we got hit with that bullwhip effect. And then, usually how do we recover from that? How do we get that replenishment of that inventory? Well, that wasn't easy to do because suppliers weren't making as much product. Transportation was having some challenges, and people just didn't have a lot of backup inventory in-house. And so we saw a lot of empty shelves. And I think the problem was, in people or companies' business continuity plans, they had planned for a fire or a flood or a hurricane or any type of incident that was, one-off, or it's going to happen today and then it goes away in a week and then we start recovery. Well, a lot of people even said our business continuity plans covered a lot of things. We never set one up for a pandemic. for a long range type of supply disruption like we've experienced. And so I think that's what really caught some companies off guard. But I think what was interesting was how quickly companies began to work together to marshal their resources and say, how do we move forward from this? How do we shift our focus of our production from commercial to consumer type of things, in the toilet paper. Food industry had to shift. What do we do with the product that normally goes into food service and into schools? How do we get that into the retail channel? So there are a lot of challenges and a lot of shortages, and it wasn't perfect. And supply chain became, the topic of conversation in Washington, D.C. and around dinner tables and everywhere, the nightly news. And so it's been some challenges. It's been an awakening in some ways, but it's also brought about some good working relationships. And I think it's really focused on how essential transportation, logistics, even people working at warehouses are to the economy. And so it became clear that these are essential workers. And so we saw a lot of challenges and a lot of issues. So I think the good news is people have, done some of the right things. They've stepped up their pay. They've continued to hire in the distribution and transportation area to keep products flowing. And they worked well with their suppliers to come up with creative solutions.
Yeah, I think, and I'll throw a point out here. I'd love to get maybe a reaction to it. Brian, earlier you were talking about the essential work of supply chain. And, when we really think about this new way in which consumers prefer to shop, it really does two things in many ways. It brings that supply chain conversation all the way down to the customer level, where we used to, in the traditional brick and mortar sense, a lot of the stuff that we did in the supply chain and logistics realm was kind of sight unseen. But now I think we're seeing those conversations go all the way down to the customer. So I think there's that piece. But of course, that also means that the work that we do in supply chain and then logistics is so much more important because it is so much more visible. And so I guess I'm interested in your thoughts as we talk about retail supply chain executives and just the skills and expertise that's necessary in order to be a really good retail supply chain executive.
Well, I'll throw out a quick comment that I recall from a retailer that I interviewed, senior executive from a very large retailer, said, I spend a third of my time on finance issues. I spend a third of my time on people issues, and I spend about a third of my time on true logistics and supply chain issues. So to be a successful retail supply chain executive today, you have to be a great leader and general manager. You can't just be kind of the X's and O's guy. You got to be the head coach. You can't just be the coordinator, so to speak, of supply chain. And that requires those different skill sets, because increasingly what we're seeing through our research is the supply chain leaders have a seat at the table, at the kind of the inner circle with the CFO and the CEO and the chief marketing officer and chief merchandising officer and those folks. And they have to be able to talk in the language of those people, which is money. They have to be able to talk in terms of customers. They have to be able to talk in terms of things beyond inventory and trucking. And so, and then they have to be able to lead their own team to say, here's what we need to do and why, and then how hold people accountable. So you got to be able to hire the right people to get the job done in this faster paced, more challenging environment. And you got to be able to do it with money and data and technology.
I'm actually interested, Craig, if I could maybe piggyback on something that you mentioned earlier. You alluded to technology, and especially these advancing technologies and where they're taking us and how they fit in this conversation regarding the future of retail.
Well, I think there's a huge, back to the comment I made about the accelerator. I believe that many retailers are regretting being so slow with investments in technology in total. It can be a little painful to get to the simplest solution, but getting the product to the customer through predictive analytics around how you're even figuring out your inventory, through just the ease of shipping and everybody being on the same system, through even master data management. So I think there's, I would say, and I bet we'll see a whole bunch of investing happening between now, because folks are even talking about it and thinking, let's get going, over the next few years to truly make sure that there is the technology that is, thoughtful and doesn't have a lot of what I call duct tape and chewing gum holding everything together, and really have invested, because, I think technology, I've sat on many executive teams, and, you'll get into a big debate over an ROI on technology. And at this point, what COVID has provided us is it's table stakes. It's actually the cost of entry. So you can stop talking about it and you can start really actioning a strategy and an implementation plan that is thoughtful, simple, and relatively fast.
I agree 100%. And the way you get to that, everybody being on the same page, everybody working off the same data, is really to go to what Craig mentioned in passing earlier, that whole idea of digitalization of your supply chain. We got to get rid of these islands of paper and these islands of Excel spreadsheets, and everybody needs to see the end-to-end supply chain at the same time. And if we digitize all of our data and give people in the organization access to it, that's absolutely critical. I think the other element that we're seeing in terms of the automation space is it's not about building these giant distribution centers that are 100% automated, because those are really built for full case types of activities in a lot of scenarios, and they're not very flexible. So the goal today that we're hearing people talk about a lot is flexible automation, where I'm not bolting things to the floor. I'm not limiting myself to only being able to do full case. I'm looking for automation that's assistive, so these cobots where it carries and does the movement. The individual does the picking. You can bring it in, and within a couple of days, you've got everybody trained on it, and it gets you an ROI that's pretty quickly, versus starting a greenfield operation where you're going to automate the entire thing, and it's really cool. And it can blow through a lot of product if you're doing heavy volumes of grocery. But if we're needing to sort individual units like fashion, and we're needing to pick individual pieces for individual consumers and pack them, we need a different type of automation. And I think that's where a lot of organizations, a lot of the innovation is looking towards those types of solutions, not the gigantic, hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on ASRS types of systems that run without any people.
So I know we're coming to a close here. I've got maybe, I'd like to get maybe one quick reaction from you, Ruth, as well as Craig, and then Brian, I've got one question specifically for you. So Ruth and Craig, I know you're working with clients very intimately, and holiday is upon us. And so not only do we have the issues that we're facing through COVID and some getting back to some degree of normalcy, if you will, relative to the pandemic, but then we now have this holiday conversation that's upon us, and really trying to figure out what this year's holiday season is going to look and feel like. What are your thoughts about holiday 2020, how to effectively navigate that, and what are you seeing as you work with your clients relative to what holiday 2020 has in store?
So from a logistics standpoint, it is going to be a bear. It is going to be an absolute bear. We are just battling every day, and as interesting as it is, we are already deep into holiday and peak season, because normally it happens a little bit later, but with PPE and the money out in the marketplace, people had so much of a need to get back in the game, whether it be for home product or whatever it is that they're buying. All of our customers are chasing demand like crazy. So we're already at full capacity, and we're talking to our customers about how we're going to move to 24/7 for that short period of time where it kicks up a little bit. But in terms of how they're planning for it, it's going to be put your seatbelt on and, all hands on deck, do everything you possibly can. Do not get blindsided by the difficulties ahead of us. So that way we're planning and looking at all of the opportunities to really try and execute, because it is absolutely going to be a bear.
Hey, Craig, quick follow-on question for you, Ruth, before we jump in. The transportation space and the freight market. I know that there's a lot of conversation around capacity constraints right now. Can you roll that into this whole conversation? How's that looking, and how is that contributing to this bear that you made reference to?
So it's a big part of it. It really is a bear on both sides, but on the transportation side, for any companies that deal with independent contractors of any kind, when we came into the situation we came into, basically none of them had any money for 6 months, right? And so as a company, we didn't have money either, but we found ways to kind of weather the storm, et cetera. So there's this entire group of people out there that may have looked at it and said, you know what, I'm done driving. I don't want to do this anymore. This is too volatile. I'd rather go get a job that doesn't have this kind of volatility. With legislation in the states, whether it be in California or whatever, there's many different things challenging it. But specific to COVID, we found that it's simply increased the driver shortage, and we are just fighting every day to find drivers, whether it be company drivers or independent drivers, to get back into the marketplace, because COVID just crushed that supply.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be a crazy yet hopeful time for I would say fashion. Hopefully people learning from what we just went through on how to pivot and have their teams ready to meet the customer where they want to be met. And there have been a lot of productive changes and capabilities that various retailers have taken on, and will, I think, serve them well, assuming that they have the inventory that they need to plow through the holiday season. So I think it's a hopeful, a little bit wait and see.
Hey, Brian, one last question for you. So I know you spend a lot of your time interviewing retail executives. You do this supply chain management study. What else, in your estimation, would you say is keeping retail supply chain management executives awake at night? As we think about COVID and how COVID has just shifted so much, as we've had conversations about this new normal that is upon us, as a final thought, what are some other things that you've seen relative to where we're headed, and what's keeping retail supply chain execs awake?
So I think, a lot of the things we talked about, big challenges. Labor is an ongoing issue that they need to think about. How do we keep costs under control while providing that great level of service that's being demanded these days? I think those are a couple of big issues. Having an adequate flow of inventory into the system. But I think a big challenge from both a service and cost standpoint is really the last mile. And how do retailers that are getting increasingly called upon by consumers to bring product to me get that done in a reasonable fashion? You've got Amazon doing their whole delivery system and trying to bring drivers into that so that they're not reliant on service partners anymore. I kind of feel like we're at the point with UPS and FedEx where if they're not already at capacity right now, they quickly will be. And I don't know that they have that much interest in going all the way to the end consumer's home. That's a big challenge for them when you're not home and they have to do redeliveries. So, the Postal Service, we're all reading and hearing about all the challenges there. So I think there's some potential bottlenecks on that last mile type of scenario. And so retailers are actively thinking about, what do I do here? Do I try to stand up my own flexible network like Amazon Flex has tried, or Walmart even tried at one point to get their hourly associates to do deliveries on their way home from the store? Or do we go to regional players? So I think those issues are facing them, and all those options are in play.
Well, I guess my last would be, I'm extremely hopeful in working with people that we will take all of these learnings and, come with a more sustainable way of accomplishing bringing product to market.
I think, this has been a great learning experience, and we've all talked about it, and hopefully everyone takes it in that same way. It's very challenging. not only for just the day-to-day systems and business, et cetera, but it's very challenging for friends, family, humans to even get their hands around what's going on. So I'm excited for our business that people continue to learn and put ourselves in a position where we kind of come out the other side as a better company and more prepared to help in the future.
Phenomenal. Well, if this sunlight that has just kind of popped up in my window is any indication, the future is quite bright after all this COVID. Well, hey, I want to thank you all. This has been just a phenomenal conversation. Again, thank you for your time and for making time to do this, but also with just your insights. It's just been really good. And we really appreciate your contributions to these conversations. So thank you so much.
We want to support you. Meaning lies within you.
Thanks for watching, and join us for the next episode, Liquidity and the Lobby.